I'm delighted to say now that we are going to have a panel to discuss these issues and the biggest political stories of the week. We have the former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan, and political commentator and reporter Georgia Gilholy. You're both very welcome to the show. And we've just heard on the news there, actually, that another MP, Aaron Bell, has put in his letter, Georgia, to the 1922 committee. He's not really a surprise given his comments on Monday, is he, though?
No, absolutely. He expressed, obviously, some very passionate remarks on Monday, talking about sort of his own family experiencing COVID and deaths in his family, I believe, during that period of obviously the lockdowns. And he sort of touched on, the hypocrisy of the parties, etc. So, in this case, it was probably only a matter of time before he submitted a letter. But I guess it is just sort of another brick in the wall, if that's the right phrase, for Boris Johnson in this situation right now.
Another brick in the face.
What do you make of it, John? Another letter goes in, and of course all of those resignations that we had over this past 24 hours.
So I think the damaging resignation was his director of policy, because she attacked him directly for bringing a far-right smear from the edges of the internet into the House of Commons. And in that way, it was a very traditional conservative approach. It was saying a conservative MP, a conservative prime minister, shouldn't act like a member of the EDL. And I think that was a very damaging one, and probably it rocked the party. I think that you could see the backbenchers were not happy with the way the prime minister used this and then defended it. Ministers weren't happy. So I think that was very damaging. I think the reorganisation number 10 had been trailed. People were going to go. They're hard to replace. It's hard to find a good chief of staff. I've been a chief of staff a couple of times. It's a really demanding role. Yeah. And I think this Aaron Bell letter is the drip, drip, drip gives you a sense of feeling of authority ebbing away. It may not. They may regroup, but you just feel like getting close to a contest now.
Well, and you're absolutely right in relation to the Chief of Staff. It's a very personal relationship that you have to have with the leader in those sorts of circumstances. And undoubtedly, Munira had that personal relationship with Boris Johnson. But as regards the other resignations yesterday, Georgia, I mean, a lot of Tory loyalists and supporters of Boris Johnson would say this is exactly what the PM said he was going to do. He said he was going to make a change in Downing Street, and this is the start of that change. Has that not got any validity?
Yeah, so from what I can see, other than Munira Mirza, all of these were sort of pre-planned and they were jumping before they were pushed, so to speak. The problem is that this still, we don't know who's going to replace them. Are they going to be any better? And also, at the end of the day, this is all self-inflicted. The parties, for example, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister. He did have authority over that and he did let it slide. And I think from what we can tell, he's not particularly... it doesn't seem to me as if this is something that sort of keeps him up at night, the guilt. I think it's more that he's been found out about it, basically. And so I agree with you about that. However, it's just one of a number of things. And like I'm saying, it's self-inflicted, so it still looks bad. We don't know who's going to replace them. And the Munira Mirza issue, of course, she did refer to those Jimmy Savile comments. I think we can all agree that those were inappropriate and obviously inaccurate in regards to Sir Keir Starmer. However, she was probably, from what I've read, about her personality and her 14 years of history working for Boris Johnson and another quite intimate relationship, I think she was also probably looking at the situation in terms of all these scandals, in terms of where the government can move on things and thinking, is there any actually policy work I can do here? Is this a failed project? And I think she probably just thought it is. And I think we can probably understand why she's thinking that. But I don't think it's the last we've ever heard from her.
Yeah. And do you see, John, any sort of coordination in these letters that you rightly say are now dripping in? It's almost as if there's one a day now, sometimes a couple a day. Do you think there's any coordination going on between these people?
I'm not sure, if it was a new Labour rebellion, it'd be a grid. There'd be one person for one day, another person for another day. It feels to me still as though lots of people have individual reasons to be against the Prime Minister. It's not as if there's a faction that's organising, because it's not yet a candidate, is there? One of the issues, you've been a leader, you know this, that the most dangerous times are when somebody chooses to become your opponent and come for you. Boris has got a couple of people, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, who we know would like to be Prime Minister, but I think they still fear the membership. They fear stepping forward. They fear creating a campaign. So without a campaign, there'll be less organisation. So you get maybe some of the more Bow Group style MPs, some of the 29. It'll all be individually motivated at the moment. We still don't have a candidate. Until we have a candidate, I still think the Prime Minister has the strength that he's dividing his opponents. They're in smaller groups. If they ever can combine, that's when they become quite dangerous.
And of course, if they go too quickly as well, then under the rules of the 22 committee, there won't be another election able to be called for a year. So that's quite significant as well.
You know, that's absolutely right. Look, I think that's one of the things that's holding back the Prime Minister's opponents. They're looking around thinking, is the time right? And so maybe the time isn't right. Maybe you want to get this at the time of his maximum vulnerability, is that after the May local elections. The problem is, as David Miliband found, he never quite thought the time was right to challenge Gordon. In the end, he didn't. In the end, Gordon went to defeat. And sometimes in politics, leadership has shown, who dares wins. And so I think somebody, if they want to seize the crown, they have to seize the initiative.
Yeah, but there's also the well-worn phrase, John, you'll be very familiar with it, that he who, tries to get the crown will never wear the crown. I mean, that is... Well,
that's so true. But, Boris Johnson is the example of, he resigned, went to the back bench and grabbed the prime ministership. So, it's ironic that he's defending him. So he's being defended by this notion you can't do that when he did it. He's the actual most recent example of doing that.
And of course, there's been other big political stories this week as well, not least the news this afternoon that China and Russia have formed what they call a deep strategic alliance. Georgia, should we be concerned about that in the West?
Certainly, but I think this has been a long time coming. Putin and Xi Jinping, their interests very much align in terms of sort of forming more of a bulwark against the West. And I think a lot of the thinking on foreign policy when it comes to the Russia threat is accurate. I think that Russia is, it's an anti-democratic force. It is aggressive. Obviously, we're seeing that in Ukraine. However, in terms of financial power, military power, China is a much bigger threat and it's on the rise in comparison to Russia. So I think that we do need to be concerned about that, and especially their coordination. I think one of the main problems is that Western countries, the UK included, we don't really have a comprehensive strategy when it comes to targeting China and Russia. We sort of muddle along and try and get financial benefits, trading with their companies, getting the gas, the oil, etc. We don't, and then sort of you have Liz Truss saying, we need to form an alliance of freedom-loving democracies, and then the actual fact of the matter is that that's not happening.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, America will be very concerned as we are about this. And it looks as if China are saying that they are opposed to any further NATO expansion, John. I mean, this is obviously something that concerns us when we look at Ukraine and Russia. And of course, the Prime Minister went to Ukraine earlier this week. Did you think that diplomacy worked, or do you think it was more for the optics, given what was going on at home?
So I think what the Prime Minister did was very, very interesting. And I know from people in the Ukrainian government that it was felt to be significant by them, because the European Union is still trying to sort out its own position. It's 27 countries trying to come to a decision, but actually Britain could go. The Prime Minister could speak. And I think the reports have been published now by the Ukrainian government and by the UK government about the conversations that the Prime Minister's had. I think it was a very important visit, a very significant one, and it shows how nimble global Britain can actually be and how practical it can be. I'm going to agree with Georgia that there's something very worrying about an alliance between China and Russia, and something hugely ironic, almost laughable if it wasn't China, about them arguing against sort of imperialist or neo-imperialist encroaching, given what they've been doing in the South China Sea, what they'd like to do in Taiwan. So I think we do have to have a comprehensive position on engagement commercially, but challenging them diplomatically, and being willing and able to stand up to them in military terms, and also continuing to press about let's get more transparency about Chinese military capabilities. That lack of transparency worries me a lot. But equally, Ukraine is part of the Belt and Road. So the Chinese have an interest in Ukraine not being invaded. They don't want Ukraine to be the new Syria.
Does that not go to the actual point that Russia isn't actually going to invade in Ukraine? And what if he was going to invade in Ukraine further? And of course, he's invaded before in the Crimea. But if he was going to further invade, he wouldn't have posted it, and we wouldn't have known about it until it actually had happened.
Look, I think there's one thing that Putin's achieved already, which is he's probably completely frozen any realistic expansion of NATO. Yeah. It doesn't matter what NATO says, there won't be expansion of NATO. And he's economically crippling Ukraine, really because the uncertainty and the risk has massively raised their bonds, the price they have to pay for bonds. So it's really hard for them to borrow in the international markets, which then means it's hard for the government to do the improvements to Ukraine, which the public wants. So you're destabilizing the European leaning government. And so in a sense, he's got all he wants. The question is, he's got the same scale of forces around Ukraine as America put around Iraq before the Iraq War. So it's an invasion force. What happens to him internally in Russia if he pulls them back? Now, if he marches his troops to the top of the hill and marches them back down, what does it do to his internal authority? Because Putin has got to manage his own country. It's not a democracy, but the people do have a voice. And so those issues, I think, are around as well. And so look, I would love there to be no conflict. It feels, certainly from my foreign policy contacts, it feels as though everybody believes that we're now in the risky month with as the ground freezes during February. This is the moment you either act or you don't act. But equally, Putin could keep his troops there for a year. It doesn't matter to him, there's tension for a year. So I think at the moment, he as you know, his intention, his strategy is to put a question mark over things. Disorder helps him. And the lack of response from Europe helps him too. That divided response. He wants us divided. He doesn't really care how he does it.
Well, unfortunately, John and Georgia, we've run out of time, but I'm quite sure we'll be coming back to all of these issues again. So thanks for joining me on the show this afternoon.